want to thank you all very much for coming to honor the life and memory of Altamir Ben Avraham Tzvi, Altamir Novice, Dr. Michael Novice. I think it's appropriate before we begin the Hespedim, I just want to comment, and I just even had a very brief discussion with one of my nieces that Saba, Dad, just was surrounded by love. And in his last days, his last months, his last year, the family just came together in a way that was a tremendous Kiddush Hashem for everyone who saw it. All of the aides and all of the hospice people were just amazed. And I just want to just give a tremendous Hakar Satov. For me, it was a life lesson to my mother-in-law, Mom, Mrs. Novice, for her loyalty and devotion to her husband, her love, and the devotion of her children, Jude, and my wife, Miriam, and of course, David. And it was really just so many discussions and so much concern on almost a daily basis to try and understand everything from how to make Dad more comfortable, to figure out how many milliliters of water and milliliters of food and how many times he should be turned, and all of the work that people put in. And it was really an honor to be part of that team. I want to give a very special thanks to the aides who took care of him, some of whom are here today, who are feeling a tremendous sense of loss, who also were able to recognize the fact that Dad was a holy man, and to the Jessa hospice people, to the medical people in our community who were always on call to help, Karen Rabin and Moshe Chin, who was with Dad in his last days, and a very special gerontologist, Sam Durso, all of whom provided expert medical advice on the spot without asking anything in return. I want to thank all of the people who came to support Dad, all of the people who came to visit him. Really a special call out to the Rutsteins, the boys who would come over and always sing to Dad, and to the Bermans who came over to talk to Dad and sing to him, and to Joanne and Bruce, who were like children to him and were with him and just loved the opportunity to be with him. I'll talk some more a little bit later during my Hesped about Andy Boltax, Pesach Aaron Boltax, and Mark Furneaux, and their contribution. There were so many people who loved Dad so much and cared for him. And as I said, he came in for a beautifully soft landing, surrounded by people he loved and cared for him. So I would like to go ahead. We have a series of speakers. Some of us will speak a little bit longer than others. The grandchildren will have a chance to have the stage. And the first person I would like to call up is my mother-in-law, Mom, Mrs. Ruth Novice, Dad's faithful and beloved wife of 70 years.
Can't see this. First thing of all, I want to thank you all for coming. Can't express it, but what I'm going to say to you is very, very short. I've known this man almost all my life. We got to know each other in the early 20s. He had a very hard life before I met him. And I told him many a time, you are the best person in the world. There is never anybody that I've heard of that actually had something negative to say about him. Never, ever. And my prayer was always, because of his hard life, that when he passes, when the time comes, that the Rabbanu Shalom would let me hold his hand. And he was so loved by the Rabbanu Shalom that he said yes, and I held his hand. That's the sort of guy. So good that everybody down here, everybody everywhere else, I think he got tired of me saying it, but I never got tired of saying it. For you with more. He was always loved. Everybody loved him. Sweet.
Judy?
I was privileged to have had the very best dad in the whole wide world. And I told him that many, many a time. Can you hear me? But mic up. Is that better? Okay, thank you. He was truly a remarkable man and one of the sweetest, kindest, most humble, and most loving man you could ever meet. Dad went through the worst horrors of the Holocaust, and after he was liberated, he suffered from the illness of tuberculosis for a long time. He could have become a bitter or an angry man, but he didn't. He turned his life into something great. He had an inner strength and a sweet smile and always a kind word. My dad was one of the boys who were brought to Windermere in England after the war to rebuild his life. That group gave my dad tremendous support for several years, and my dad was eternally grateful for all the opportunities that they gave him. He made lifelong friends from that group that helped him get through all the trauma that he went through. And now the children and grandchildren of those boys have similarly formed strong friendships with each other. Dad built a successful career despite many challenges. After the war, he was very sick and very traumatized. He had to learn English. He hadn't been in school for the past 6 years. He had to make up for all that missed schooling, which he started while he was still sick in bed. He did a communications course. But he persisted until he earned a PhD in physics. My dad was later recruited to go to the US to work on the movie camera that went to the moon, and that camera recorded Neil Armstrong's first steps down the ladder onto the moon. He built a loving family with my mom by his side. I was born just a few years after the Holocaust ended. As an adult, I'm amazed at how he was able to provide us with such a stable and loving home so soon after all the trauma that he had experienced. We always had a roof over our head. We always had food on the table. And my dad was a very emotionally stable person despite all that he had gone through, and he was an excellent father. I remember one day as a teenager, when I was having a hard time, I announced that I was running away from home, and I ran out the door. And my dad ran after me, And he said, "Please come back, we love you." And I came back, and I never ran away again. And that's the kind of father he was. One time, one of my children was going through a very challenging time and was misbehaving, and my father said to him, "You're a good boy." And that made such an impact on my son that he forever adored his grandfather. My dad was very talented in many ways. He was an excellent violin player, and he encouraged each of us to learn the violin. He fixed just about everything that needed fixing around the house, and this was before the days of learning from YouTube videos, so he had to figure out how to do it all by himself. One time, our house needed a new roof, and so he recruited all of us and some friends, and it took us all summer, and we redid the roof. And at the end, when we finished, we all climbed up on the roof with our violins, and we became fiddlers on the roof. My dad always loved music, and for the past few years, when he couldn't talk very much anymore, the best way to communicate with him was with music. Our family and friends sang many beautiful songs with him over the years, and he especially loved Jewish and Hebrew songs. And many of you have sung with him, and we appreciate that greatly. I learned from my dad that one should never give up, even if the challenges are daunting. Dad was always kind to everybody, and I don't remember him ever getting angry. Since his passing yesterday, I have heard from so many people who told me that my dad was kind to them and treated them with respect and dignity, which really made an impact on them. My dad had a gentle, sweet soul, and his life after survival filled the world with hope and inspiration. I hope I can keep his lessons in my heart as we move forward without him in this world. I love you, Dad, more than I could ever say.
So just want to mention, there's so many people to thank. I also want to thank all of the grandchildren for their loyalty and love for Dad. A really special thank you to Benji, who would call almost every day and sing Eif and Pripachik to him over the phone, and also to my niece Sarah, who was always there to provide also medical advice and insight. I'm going to, I recently wrote an article for the VOD Journal, and I talked about Dad. I had no idea that it would be part of HASPID. But I thought that I would read from that and from some other things and share with you some insights. And I'm speaking now on behalf of my dear wife and myself. In coping with loss, one may draw inspiration from those who have experienced great personal tragedy and who nonetheless have grown in their emunah and in their capacity for love and connection. As an example, I turn to my beloved father-in-law, Alta Mayor Novice, who recently celebrated his 97th birthday and the 70th anniversary of his marriage to his devoted and loving wife, Ruth. The tattooed numbers on his arm are a testament to the horrors of his youth, visited upon him by the Nazis' Yamach Shemam, the Warsaw Ghetto, the murder of his parents, the slave labor, the cattle cars, Auschwitz, and the Death March. Despite all this, he survived the war, got married, and raised the family, which has grown to include dozens from children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, earned his PhD in physics, and had a very successful professional career, all the while remaining a fully observant Torah Jew. On his 90th birthday, his wife and children published his biography entitled Life of Michael Novice Before, During, and After the Holocaust, to which I contributed the following letter. Dear Dad, I wanted to take a few moments to wish you a happy birthday and to let you know how much you mean to me. Of course, I thoroughly enjoy your company and seeing you every day at Shul. This truly brightens my day. You are kind, sweet, unassuming, humble, and blessed with a very nice sense of humor. I am also grateful that your many wonderful qualities have been transmitted to your lovely daughters and son, including my wife Miriam, and through her to our children and all of the siblings' children. More than all of this, however, is the fountain of inspiration and strength you provide to me and to all those who have the privilege of knowing you. We know that you have seen humanity at its worst and experienced the forces of darkness at the zenith of their power. We know you have suffered incalculable loss and unimaginable hardship, and our hearts break when we contemplate your suffering for even a moment. But the question remains, how did you respond to all this? Did you spend the rest of your life a bitter, broken, and angry man? Did you walk away from Hashem and turn your back on his Torah? Did you decide not to build a home and bring children into this cruel world? No, you did not make those decisions, though no one would have dared criticize you if you had. The Satmar Rebbe Zitzal once told his Hasidim that they could get a bracha from someone who has numbers tattooed on his arm and who puts on tefillin. We who have the privilege of davening you at the weekday Shachris Minyan have a poignant reminder of the Rebbe's words every time you put on your tefillin and take them off. We see the numbers and we see the tefillin. One wonders, however, what would the Rebbe have said about a bracha from a man who not only has the numbers in the tefillin, but who was also kind, sweet, unassuming, humble, and blessed with a very nice sense of humor. What would he have said about a man who, having seen the worst, can still see the good in the world and in people? About someone who cares about other people's comfort more than his own? In my humble opinion, I think he would have said that merely being in the presence of such a person is a bracha, and that those who have the schus of knowing him have a sacred responsibility of always seeing the good in the world, appreciating every moment of life, and achieving greatness to the best of their abilities. It was a living testament, his life was a living testament of a saintly person who chose to reaffirm his faith in God, in the potential goodness of humanity, and in the healing power of kindness. All this despite seeing the worst the world had to offer. To know Michael Novice was to know a man who always put the needs of others, Jew or Gentile, before his own. So while his is a story of overcoming great adversity and achieving success, implicit in his life is something no less profound than the victory of goodness over evil. I remember that having him at the Shachris Minyan, it was always a very beautiful thing. Pesach Aaron Boltax would always pick him up earlier than the minyan started in those days at 6:30, and he would pick him up sometime around 6 and bring him to shul. And he and Mark Furneaux would sit and learn together, always before Shachris. Mark would always sit next to him every single Shachris, every single davening, and always be there to turn the pages for him so he never lost his place, and he always knew where he was holding. And I maintain that all of the davening that you sacrificed in order to help my father-in-law, all of those prayers that you couldn't say with Kavanah because you were helping him, went to the highest madrigas of Shemayim. I, on the other hand, would have the opportunity of driving him home. And as we drove home, we would always kibitz a little bit, and he would try and teach me a little bit of Yiddish. And so I mastered a few set phrases. One of the phrases that we'd always say is, "Es ist kalt in der Reusen," it's cold outside. And then he would say, "Aber es ist warm in der Weinig." But he says, but it's warm inside. Now I can honestly say, with the absence of a person like Dad in the world has gotten colder. Es ist kalt in der Reusen. It's cold outside. And it's also missing him. Es ist kalt in der Weinig. It's also cold inside too, to miss him so much. The world is a lesser place. I draw comfort from the fact of a Gemara I've always thought about whenever I thought about Dad, and I watched him slowly come in for a landing. I watched him slowly decline from somebody who was a brilliant scientist, capable of fixing every problem. He was a shul president, he was a shul gabbai, to someone who eventually was bedridden. He couldn't get out of bed. He had a cannula for oxygen in his mouth. He had a peg, a feeding tube in his stomach. He couldn't move. He was beset by dementia. And he was always, always, even in the midst of things, when everything about him was stripped away, his core existed, and he was always kind and sweet. He would ask and he'd cry out, sometimes in panic, "Where's my wife? Where's my wife?" And his children would say, "It's okay, Dad. She's in another room." And then he would say, "Thank you very much." He was always so dignified and so polite. And I still remember when I had the schus of being able to be part of the rotation of feeding him in the morning and setting up the peg and the IV, the food and the water and programming the kangaroo and all of that, I would always talk to him. And I would always say, "Dad, it's Rabbi Yosef Singer," because he always referred to me as Rabbi Yosef Singer. And he would look over, and then I would say, "Was machst du? How are you?" And in the midst of everything, he would always say, "Ich mach gut. I'm good. I'm good. I'm always good. It's always good." This is a famous bracha in Eruvin that I always thought about in connection with my father-in-law. The bracha in Eruvin in Yud Gimel Amud Beis, it says, "Amar Rebbe, had mechadedna michavroi dechazisalach Rebbe Meir me'achorei." Rebbe said, the reason I achieved such a high level of scholarship and the reason I rose to the top was because I was able to sit in the Beis Medrash with Rebbe Meir, and I was able to see the back of Rebbe Meir. I was in the back, and I was able to see the back of Meir. I was able to see the back of Rebbe Meir. He says, "Ilu chazise makme," had I been able to go ahead and face him and learn directly face-to-face from him, I would have even been greater. And I always think about that, and I always thought about that in terms of my father-in-law, Meir, Alta Meir, that even when we saw him from the back, even when he saw with all of his diminished skills, even when we saw him in the twilight of his life, when he had nothing left except his heart and his kindness, there was still so much that anyone who had anything to do with him was able to take from him and learn from him and appreciate what's important in life and what's beautiful in life. There was something else that we used to say too. When we came to the end of the ride, he would always say, "Wir sind gekommen," we have arrived. And I remember learning in Nefesh HaChaim, in Shar Dalet and Perek Yud Zayin, the Nefesh HaChaim talks about what happens when a tzaddik dies and what happens when he leaves this world. Leaves this world and he's accompanied by malachim, he's accompanied by all of his good deeds. The Nefesh HaChaim is talking about somebody who was able to learn Torah Lishma, but I think I can take some poetic license and apply it to someone who is just a tzaddik and so pure, and that this person would be accompanied by malachim and would be accompanied to the highest levels of Shemayim, and any obstacles that stood in the way of Gan Eden, of the Garden of Paradise and Olam Haba, the doors would get smashed down, and all of the good deeds and all of the Torah would announce the presence of this person, and the Rabbanu Shalom would welcome this person in his arms and in his bosom. And when I think of Dad saying, "Wir sind gekommen," we have arrived, I think of all the heavenly host that is accompanying Dad from this world into the kever, and his neshama is going up to the highest levels of Shemayim, and they're saying, "Alta Meir, he's here. He's here. Look at his tattoos. Look at his midos. Look at his children. Look at his grandchildren. Look at his great-grandchildren. Look at the kind of person he was. Look at everything about him. He's here. Smash the gates. Meir is umgekommen. He has arrived." Thank you. Next, we'll hear from his son, David Novice.
Singer, in addition to the thank yous that you gave, I would also like to add another thank you, which is to the men who prepared the Tahara. I heard from from one of them that they went above and beyond. I'm sure they always do the mitzvah with the greatest of kavod, but I heard that for Dad specifically, they went above and beyond, and I appreciate that. Imagine a woman who loves her son, and the son is not well, malnourished, and she has to send him away. And after a day, she's missing him, and he's missing her, and he wants to know. He doesn't know when he'll see her again, but he's hoping he never knows when it'll be. And that goes to 2 days. He's thinking about her, and it goes to 3 days, 4 days. He can't get in touch with her. And it goes to a week, another second week. And they miss each other. He'd like to know when he can see his mother again. And it goes to a month. And it goes to 2 months. And it goes to a year. He hasn't seen his mother. And it goes to 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and by now he gets the nutrition, he's able to get the nutrition he needs. But he can't get in touch with his mother anymore. And then, so he carries on with his life. He builds his life without being able to get in touch with his mother. Until 84 years later. After 84 years, he's reunited with his mother. What a simcha that must be. What a simcha must be coming in Shemayim when Dad can see his mother again after 84 years. What a simcha, a family man like Dad was, to be able to be with his family, his father, his mother, his brother who died in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, whom he also hadn't seen. What a simcha there must be coming up. After the war, when I was young and knew about there was such a thing as a Holocaust, I knew there were many people who had questions about the Holocaust. There were many more survivors at the time. There were people who had said, if this could have happened, I don't believe there's a God. There were people who just had questions like, where was God? Why did these kinds of things happen to such people? There were lots of questions. And Dad didn't have answers to the questions, and he proceeded on his life. But now he'll be able to have those answers together with seeing his mother and his father, and they'll also see why this had to happen. He carried on his life by just focusing on what was in front of him and not answering these types of questions and not delving into what had happened. He put it aside to the best he could. But he didn't speak about it, typically. He was not one to speak about his Holocaust experiences. Towards the latter half of his life, or even maybe call it the end of his life, I think he was in his 60s, he started going around to schools and making a presentation of what his experiences had been. He thought it important because in the schools they had no idea. Something that he thought is so basic as a history lesson, they didn't have any idea. So he brought himself to break down the barriers enough to speak in schools. And it was factual. He would say, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. He didn't bring in the emotion because that was still bottled in. Once he spoke in Beis Yaakov of Baltimore. I had the honor of being able to be there. And he gave his presentation. He had slides. And all the girls, I think it was a general assembly of all the girls in the school, maybe just certain level grades, probably the higher grades. And then when it came time to questions and answers, there was a wise, perceptive girl who asked a question. She said, how did you get through it? What did you have? Did you have something that made you get through all this death around you, all this cruelty, all this starvation, all the terrible experiences, what drove you to be able to survive all that and to keep on going and to not give up? And my father, who was not emotional and not able to typically express his emotions in something like that, choked up. He didn't answer, and somehow along they continued the presentation. But later, Mom, she said, knows him. They just celebrated 70th anniversary, and knows him well. My mother was able to tell me what that choke up was about, and that it was that he was thinking of his mother. That during all those years, it was the expectation, the hope that somehow or another he would get together with his mother again that got him through. I'm going to tell you a story that's said in the name of the Klausenberger Rebbe. Dad didn't know the Klausenberger Rebbe, and the Rebbe didn't know Dad. But this is the story that's told. My father was liberated on May 8th. He always celebrated that day. It was a day of Hakaras Hatov for when he was liberated. But apparently the Klausenberger Rebbe must have been somewhat earlier because it was Pesach time. Pesach time, and he had a following of Talmidim. He had gone through the Holocaust experiences, and his followers had gone through these most awful of experiences. And their life was a ruins, a shambles. They were realizing they had no place to go. They had nothing they could do. They had nothing. They were completely at a loss. How does one celebrate Pesach like that? What kind of a Pesach is it when you don't know? You're sick. And so they said, like, to the Rebbe, how can we do a Pesach? And what he said is that at the Pesach Seder, we typically say, B'domai chayi, b'domai chayi, which we understand to be, with your blood you shall live. Repeated, meaning it's the two bloods, the bris milah and the korban that they had sacrificed and put the blood on the wall, on the doorpost. And the Klausenberger Rebbe said, we're going to understand this is b'domai chayi. In your silence, we will live. In silence, we will live. That is, we will carry on. We will not answer those questions. We will be quiet about it because now is not the time to get the answers. And they had the Seder like that. And that's, though Dad may not have known the story, certainly not at the time, but that's what Dad did. He was able to, as Jude said, to get degrees and learn a language. And the bar at those times, they didn't make universities they would lower the bar for exceptions to help people. The bar was the bar, and if you needed to know English, and if you needed to learn your math, and if you needed to learn your science, you had to perform at the expectations of the university, and he did. And he raised a family. One thing I can say about that family is it was a family that was different than all of the families around us. I remember in Elmira, New York, it was a Jewish family. Were there Jewish families around us? If I knew them, they were few and far between. So we were pretty different than the people around us, and I'm sure I was influenced to some degree by the outside world. And if I would say at the dinner table, I hate these mushrooms, it would be a freezing. Somebody in this house used the word hate. The word hate is not used in our house. Dad would probably not say anything, but just squirm and indicate his displeasure. And probably Mom would be the one to somehow or another convey the idea that we don't use the word hate in our house. Those of the family who are mourning now, including the spouses of the children and spouses of the grandchildren, could feel his love, Dad's love for them all. we have a large mix of types of people. We have a congregational rabbi, we have somebody with smicha in Yud and Yudin, which is a high level. We have rabbis who have published Sforim. We have kollel men of many years and fewer years. We have teachers, we have a doctor, we have nurses, we have a nurse practitioner, a social worker, a speech therapist, computer programmers, and seamstress, a professor. It's a wide, eclectic, and a sort of sense group. And each of them are mourning because they felt Dad loved them. And it didn't matter if he was to the right of them or to the left of them, if they were to the left of him or to the right of them. He loved them as family, and they never occurred to them probably to even wonder, like, yeah, you're not quite right exactly, with all the level of observance as me. It doesn't matter. I love you because you're family and because you're Jewish. He was accepting of all people, and he'd have people at his home. Halknas Orchim was big in his life. And when you're able to do Halknas Orchim, it means you're able to accept all sorts of people. There were characters that would come, and there was family. Some of the family was my in-laws. Some people have mechutanim, where you say, I know what a mechutan is. It's somebody who's just like an esrog. You dance around the table with it for 7 days, and then you discard it. But he was not like that with his in-laws, with my in-laws, with his mechutanim. They were close family, an extended family. There was a time in San Jose had a Jewish community, and it was having a very hard time. It was having a machlokas, which was tearing the city apart. Some of the Yidden say we should serve Hashem this way. Some of the Yidden in the city said we should serve Hashem that way. Some of the Yidden were getting into it with all of their energy and zeal. And one such spoke to my father with his ideas of how to approach the situation, and my father gave him a perspective that he had not seen. He said, basically the approach was, we're all Yidden, and the differences between us are pale compared to the differences between the Goyim who hate us and the Yidden. And the Jewish people, the Yidden have to come together. Yes, we have our differences. Yes, I believe we should be serving Hashem this way. But we also have to have a perspective on it to not get out of hand. And that's what he was able to do, and he was able to help influence this other person as well like that. Dad didn't know that Amalek, who he had had all sorts of experiences with, had reared its ugly head again in the last year. If he had, he wouldn't get up and say, we all have to get together at the podium, because he wasn't a podium type of person. But he would have thought that and tried to convey that by his just very personality. He would have wanted us to understand that we have to help each other as he did. He would help whoever he could if they needed food, if they needed money, if they needed a job, he would do the best he could. And if we would learn that lesson, then death would be swallowed. Ila hamavas lanetzach, u'macha Hashem Elokim dima me'al kol panim.
Now we're going to hear from the grandchildren. They're Wortlich, 3 to 5 minutes. And so first, I'd like to call up Jonathan Roth.
I had the privilege of living for a summer with Saba and Safta. And I distinctly recall one afternoon sitting at the kitchen table with Saba, and it was a rainy day. It had been pouring all day. And in an attempt to make some idle small talk, I said to Saba, "Terrible day, isn't it?" And I couldn't anticipate in that moment that I would hear one of the most profound responses that I've ever heard in my life. And Saba said, "As long as I have a covering over my head and a little bit of bread to eat, I'll be all right." I thought that was the essence of who Saba was. He went through such unspeakably terrible things, and he could have emerged angry. He could have emerged selfish. But somehow, the special man that he was, his experiences made him realize how little he personally needed. A roof over his head and a little bit of bread to eat. That's what Saba needed for himself. And he asked for nothing more for himself. He never thought about himself beyond that. He only thought about others. He devoted all other energy beyond his minimal needs to kindness to other people. He could have been angry, but I never heard the man raise his voice in my entire life. He could have been selfish. He never thought about himself. It was always, did you have enough to eat, and are you warm? It could be 95 degrees and we just got home from a restaurant, but are you warm, and did you have enough to eat? He was always concerned about the smallest needs of others to make sure that they were fulfilled, but never himself. A roof over his head and a piece of bread to eat, that was all that he needed. Over the last few years, Saba, the main way to communicate with him was through song. And one of the songs I always loved singing with him was Oda Vinu Chai. Verses are Oda Vinu Chai, our Father is still alive. And then the second stanza, or sometimes the first that goes in circles, is Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live. And I always thought that was perfect for Saba. He was a survivor. He showed what it meant for a Jew to survive, to be strong, but to do it with the utmost kindness, with the utmost humility, with the lack of any ego whatsoever, which of righteousness, which every single person that met him could identify and could see that this person was a tzaddik, was a righteous person. And so Saba is not with us anymore, but every single one of his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, every single person that he met took something away from that kindness, from that humility, from that righteousness. And so Saba will live on through all of us. Oda Vinu Chai, Am Yisrael Chai.
I'm going to call upon my son Moshe to speak. I just remember one anecdote that speaks very much to what John was just saying. It was at a Pesach Seder. Dad was sitting at the other end of the table, and something shocking happened. He asked if someone could please pass him the water. Right? He said, "Could you please pass the water?" And I was just shocked. I had to look up. How is it that my father-in-law is asking for water? And we passed him the water, and he went ahead and he poured it for the person who was sitting next to him. That was Dad. Sure.
as one of the older grandchildren. I felt like I really got to know Sab. I really got to know him. Trips to California, trips when he would come back. I remember going and Costco trips and TCUI yogurt, joking around with him. And I really got to know Saba. Really get to see his personality and see who he was, see how special a person he was. I got to watch him, as I got older, see the way he interacted with other people. And the one time I heard him get upset at somebody was when he heard someone being mean to somebody else. The only time I ever heard Saba raise his voice or be upset at somebody. Even that was fleeting and quick, but he made his point. And I watched how Saba aged and moved to Potomac, and continued everything he was doing, and continued to shed physical, and shed all of the things that we consider to be so valuable, but were irrelevant to him. And then we all got to watch him become more and more of a spiritual being, someone who we could look at, draw tremendous inspiration from, see something and be together with him, even though there was nothing physical there anymore. Recently heard something from Joey Haber, who said it over from Evolva, who wrote a letter to one of his kids, and I'll abbreviate and paraphrase it, but his message was, the main part of life is to try to live a physical life. You live a physical life, the main part of life is to live a spiritual life. The more of a spiritual life that you have, the less death is a real thing. Because the person, the spiritual person, the real person is still there. So instead of saying goodbye and losing the person, they're really just in another room. They're still with us. And I think Saba has been doing this and moving towards this, becoming more and more of a spiritual person, spiritual being, someone that we could connect with and that we can learn from and be with, even when we're not with him. My kids, who are Aaron, who's 8 years old now, when we told him about Saba, he's never known Saba, who Saba really was. But when we told him about Saba, crying and extremely upset. And he looked at us and he said, I want my kids to know Saba. But he, even an 8-year-old, can see who Saba was and what Saba was to everybody. What he meant to us, what he meant to people who can't even really know him. But that's Saba. We're going to miss him a tremendous amount, but we all have our lessons and we all have everything we can learn from Saba, and we'll continue to do so.
Up just with a story that I had heard that really speaks to something that everyone here is talking about. Someone named Rivgad Eisner, who he was somebody who was a real Baal Musar, somebody who really worked on himself and developing himself. The leader of many people. He went through the war. Through the war, he gave words of encouragement to people and really drove people forward. One time when he was in the camps, he turned to some other people who were with him, and he said, "What midah? What are we going to take out of the camps? What are we going to take with us?" And one person turned and said, "I'm going to take the midah of rachmanas, being compassionate and kind to other people." Another person said the midah of zrizas, to be motivated, driven, the last person said, I'm going to take the midah, being mistapik b'muat, to not need much, to just be satisfied with just a little bit. So if God turned to them and said, typically naturally, a person would take out just the opposite. A person would leave with no rachmanis for other people. They would wallow in self-pity. That a person wouldn't walk out being mistapik b'muat. They would feed his stapkus. They would feed that to other people. They would tell them, look what I went through. You don't need much. You don't need anything. Look what I went through. And Zrizas, he said, after someone works very hard, pushes himself, runs a marathon, and now they're sitting down to relax, they finally get to the finish line, you can't get them to budge. So that's a typical person. Saba was no typical person. Saba was a very, very special, unique person. Saba, like we've heard from many people, Saba after the war picked himself up, made something of himself, worked hard, determined, schooling, raising a family, like we've heard. Saba had tremendous, tremendous compassion. Discussing, was gentle and kind, sweet person, always a smile, a twinkle in his eye, was just the most pleasant of people to be around. Sweet, a good word. Whenever you would ask him how he's doing, always a smile, a good word. And with the stapkus b'muat, Saba needed nothing for himself, and all he cared about was other people, making sure that they had what to eat, were taken care of. Amazing to think what Saba was able to accomplish and make of himself. Then with one quick thing that speaks to Saba was at a birthday many years ago, Saba insisted on getting no birthday gifts. He said he doesn't want any gifts. He said being alive is enough. That was really Saba. He appreciated life and he pushed through and he made the best of it and did tremendous things with his life.
Rabbi Lopiansky writes in one of his books about a personal story that he had. He used to go visit an elderly man in an old age home, and he noticed how a lot of the people who were living there were bitter, were grumpy. They were older. Things were uncomfortable, and you would hear it. And this person, he took him out. They had a whatever, got him into a wheelchair. He took him outside. I don't think he was really able to speak, but he took him out for fresh air, whatever it is. He brought him back inside, and he got him settled back in the bed. And this person, it was very difficult for him to speak, to say anything, but he was clearly straining. He wanted to say something, and Rebbe Lepiansky got closer to him, and he heard that the person was saying, "Make sure you return the chair so that other people, the wheelchair, so other people could use it." I think that very much speaks to Saba. Even the people who met Saba when he couldn't eat by himself, and he barely said anything. The way to get him to talk was to sing. I remember I think within the past year or so, we were sitting at a Shabbos table, a Yantif table, and it was whatever all the chaos was going on, and the aide was there, and she had just finished feeding Saba. She whatever set him up, and he looked at her and smiled and said, "Thank you very much." He didn't say anything. The only thing he could say was, "Thank you very much." Even a few weeks ago, months ago, you say hi Saba. You try and talk to him, get him to talk. He says, "Saba, it's so good to see you." Likewise, he only saw the good, and when everything, he had no sense of of caring about what other people would think about him. He didn't need to. He wasn't putting on a show. There's no acting. All it was Saba saw. Saba appreciated other people, appreciated what they did for him, and appreciated seeing and spending time with people. That was who Saba was giving and loving, and that's who he was.
Many people expressed to my mother at one point that a lot of times people with advanced dementia, a lot of times they become more irritable when basic functions and more don't have the ability to do what they always used to be. They get more irritable. Saba was the opposite. And I think the sense that everyone had was that if what a person walks out of what Saba walked out from with such midas tavis, those midas don't go away easily. Those midas are there as long as there's life in the person's dam. That those midas are always going to be there. Every conversation with Saba, every interaction, everyone always was so comfortable and happy.
As a grandchild, growing up close to Saba and Safta, I know personally what an impression it has made to see Saba and Safta regularly, and I sort of feel like Aaron that I feel that we, having been zeicha to see such godless, such purity, we have a responsibility to tell our children about a Saba we once had that was the most selfless person, the most caring person. He was the most comfortable when he was making others comfortable. And when we feel that we have things that make us want to give up or make our children want to give up, we have to remind ourselves of our Saba, who, throughout everything that he went through, had unbelievable inner strength to rise up against the pettiness and the lowest that he experienced, to rise up to become the least petty, the most honorable and serene person. So it's something that we should take from here and bring Saba with us and pass his message on to our children and grandchildren.
Years ago, Saba celebrated his 90th birthday. many people ask him, "B'meh harachta yamim?" What was the secret to your longevity? How do you do it? 90 years, it's no small feat. How do you do that? So Saba responded, he was asked this question on a number of occasions. He responded differently at different occasions. Sometimes he would just shrug. One time I heard he said, one step at a time, one day at a time. Another time, I think he was asked, how do you do it? He said, you get the right wife. But I think Saba was telling us here three different ideals that he practiced for himself, and he was trying to convey that. This one idea, he said, get the right wife, that he was expressing his appreciation for Savta, his appreciation Hakaras Hatov in general, but he was really appreciating what Savta, everything that she did for him to keep him going all those years, and that's really what kept him going, and that was the midah of appreciating that Saba was showing. Like another example, I saw where Saba had this midah when he came to Baltimore for Yom Tov, and he was davening at the shuls we were davening, and he, after Yom Tov, I saw him writing out checks to all the shuls. So saying you don't need it, you don't have to give checks to the shul. It's expected. There's members, people come and go, but if he benefited, he benefited from here, so he wants to express his appreciation and give back to the shul. He always wanted to give back to any person any organization, any person that helped him out, he wanted to give back to. That's always what he was looking to do. The other midah, what the Saba's other answer, he was saying one step at a time, but he was telling us that's the midah of perseverance, of going on. That Saba after the war, he could have been angry, resentful, and he went right there and he built a family. He got degrees. He became very successful, and even recently he was lots of medical challenges. But what kept him going was his drive, his fight to live. That he really wanted to live. His perseverance, one step at a time. That's how he did it. That's who Saba was, and that's who he was teaching us this idea of one step at a time. And I think the third thing, which is the biggest, most essential midah that Saba had, is just that simple shrug, right? Humility. That he always shied away from the limelight. He was never looking for any kavod. He would always he would come early in the morning to shul, arrange the chairs, do everything that needed to be done, but nobody needs to know about what he's doing. He was always looking to help out, but totally just shying away from the limelight. That's the midah of humility, and that's what he's saying. That's how that was his secret to longevity. I mean, Saba was always looking to help people. Like the story my father likes always saying over about, they were offering different types of wine, the red wine and white wine, and they're asking around they're asking everyone around the table, what do you want? And my father's sitting there next to Saba, and he's thinking, I don't know, what it's my own father. What does he like? Does he like red wine, white wine? I don't even know. And then they got to Saba, they ask him, which one would you like? Whichever one needs finishing. That's always Saba. He's always looking to help. He has no personal self-interest. The Saba was gifted with a brilliant mind, very intelligent individual. He had PhDs, and he was a chess master, and he was influential in development of technology in the space race. I got to see a little bit of that even when I thought he's older. He doesn't know, that's why I played him a game of chess, and I thought he was like he still knew what he was doing. But as he got older, he was affected by dementia, and that really robbed him of of his gift of intelligence. It really grabbed him. But the one thing that it was not able to grab him is his core midas. Even as he got older and he didn't have the cognitive abilities, his mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. But you could see his core midas, his essence, was all the way, was there. Like I had the experience. Okay, so I mentioned this. The last time I visited Saba a few weeks ago, and he was clearly agitated, turning over and all upset. Where am I going? Where are they taking me? Saying, Jude, lean over, calm down. You don't have to go anywhere. Stay right here. And he said, thank you very much. That's all I needed to know. And that's his midas, his gentleman, his nature. That stayed. And it was a real limud musar. It was every time just visiting Saba was like a real musar experience, learning to inculcate his midas tavis that he excelled in. And we should all be zeicher to take from that and be la amaris l'netzach. Baruch Hashem, l'kendem al kapanim.
Beautiful Hespedim. We're going to say Tehillim Chaf Gimel, and then we'll do a Kel Maleh, and then we'll proceed with the burial. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Roi Lo Echsar, Binos Deshe Yabitzeni Al Mei Menuchos Yenahaleni, Nafshi Yeshovev Yancheni B'Magleit Tzedek L'man Shemo, Gam Ki Elech B'Geit Somavis Lo Irara Ki Ato Imadi, Shivtecha Mishantecha Hemi Yenachamuni, Tarach Lefanai Shulchan Neged Tzodedai, Deshante B'Shemen Roshi Kaisi Levaya, Achto V'Chesed Yudefuni Kol Yemei Chayai, V'Shavti B'Veis Adonai Liodech Yamim.
El Malei Rachamim, Shechein Bamroimim, Amtzei Menucha Nachoin Al Kanfi HaShechin, Ov Malois Kedoshim Utorim Kezer Hargem Asirim, Es Nishmas Tal Timir Ben Avram Tzvi, Shalach Loilam Moi Bavur, Shanachnu Mispalel Bad Askar Es Nishmasoi, Nikan Eder Tei Menucha Soi, Lachein Baal Rachamim Astireu B'Seiser Kanov Avaloilamim, Yitzror B'Tzrach Chaim Es Nishmasoi, Adonai Hu Nachlasoi V'Noch V'Shalom Al Mishkovoi V'Noimar Amen.
Pallbearers come forward. Jonathan, Moshe, Avrami, Tully, and Yehuda Friedman.